Hello guys, how you doing? Another video, new haircut, new video, lots going on. So today, instead of starting with a question, I wanted to try something else. So the other day I was flying back from New York and I ran into this article here called A Cycle of Mystery, the business of building commercial aircraft. And I actually didn't read it on the airplane because you don't want to hear about how the sausage is made while you're eating the sausage. But I set it apart. I think these might be interesting. Again, I haven't read it, but I'll tell you first of all why I think it'll be interesting. And the other thing is just a shout out to this newsletter, Construction Physics. I think they do a good work. I have read some of their articles on nuclear, on fusion. We'll probably have some videos on nuclear in the future. It's something I'm super into. On Bell Labs was also good. On why home building has not been revolutionized. That was also interesting. And I think they had something on data centers. Yeah, how to build an AI data center, which was also good. I'm not like a huge newsletters guy. There's just way too many. But like I said, on the flight, I did go through a bunch of them and it was good. So shout out to these guys. I don't even know who actually writes it. Brian Potter. Great job, Brian. But anyways, so the reason why I think, commercial aircraft are interesting, and everyone has heard about Boeing recently and all that fiasco and everything that's going on. But it's a very interesting industry. I think first of all because it's basically a duopoly. There's two major companies that own most of the production, Boeing and Airbus. There's more companies than that actually. There's the Chinese have one company, the Russians have two. Brazil has Embraer. Canada had Bombardier till recently. And then when you go to smaller aircraft, there's even more. Of course, Cessna with Textron and so on, and Gulfstream and etc. So I think it's interesting to think, first of all, how we got here to the point where there's only two companies that own this mode of transportation that it's basically magic, right? It's like if you want to go anywhere far, this is the only way, basically. So how did that happen? Yeah. And then I think the other thing that's super interesting, and not a lot of people might know this, but it's actually, and something that happened today. So the Boeing stock. So Boeing stock right now, the entire stock market's down on a weak job reports, about a recession, whatever. But earlier this week, you can see a bump here, and actually Boeing got a new CEO. So there's actually a new CEO called Kelly Ortberg. I think he actually has a background in aerospace. I just quickly browsed his profile. So he was previously at Rockwell Collins, which I think it's an aerospace kind of like OEM or supplier, multinational corporation headquarters. Yeah, providing avionics and IT for aerospace. So they got someone from the industry. So this seems good for Boeing. But where I was going is like the thing that I think is interesting about Boeing, Airbus, and so on is that it's the backlogs. So if you're trying to figure out how big is Boeing's market cap is only 100 billion only. It's a lot of money, of course, but again, if you were to think of like this is almost like a magic mode of transportation that we cannot do without. I would argue it's feels cheap. And they have 73 billion in sales last year, and we can see here. By the way, this website Finviz is actually really good to see financials, really easy without having to go through the investor relation websites. We can see that Boeing's revenue actually has been hurt recently. Obviously, the pandemic was terrible for business. Right before the pandemic, there was the whole MAX thing going on, which was also terrible for business. Boeing's revenue used to be basically over 100 billion. And you can see here that 90% of that was made of the airplanes themselves, 10% from service. And as revenue has collapsed, obviously they're selling less airplanes, but the service revenue is still there. The airplanes in the field is still need to be serviced. Makes sense. And now you can see it's coming back. Anyways, what's really interesting again about Boeing is that if you were to buy an airplane, You want to buy a 737 US Boeing, and it's like, here's the money. You cannot actually buy an airplane right now. There's a giant backlog, and so let's go take a look at this backlog here. So if you go on their investors website, and let's see, I haven't been here in a while, but we're looking for presentations. We're looking for just some documents here, reports maybe. Yeah, this is presentation. Usually there's a presentation, a nice graphical presentation with on the earning calls. Let's expand here, make sure you can see it. They'll walk through their numbers and their breakdown between commercial and defense and so on, but there should be a backlog section here. Yeah, so for commercial, and again, this is just commercial, defense is separated, but for commercial, the backlog is $437 billion, over 5,400 airplanes. So people have placed orders for 5,400 airplanes, and those are binding orders. It's not like you can just, oh, never mind, cancel my order. Usually there's a cancellation fee, and so it's a big deal. Like, there's a huge demand for airplanes, and the backlog is 5,400 airplanes. They delivered 92 airplanes last quarter, right? So in the last 3 months, they've only delivered 92 airplanes, basically one airplane a day. But their backlog is 5,400 airplanes. And again, this is Boeing. There's a lot of bad PR lately. They had the MAX thing going on for almost 4 years now. So let's look at Airbus. Does Airbus also have a big backlog? The answer might shock you. Let's see here. It's a presentation from the 30th of July. So this is great. All of these reports are very new. I remember, the Europeans don't call it a backlog. I think they call it something else. Order book. They call it order book. So the order book for Airbus in the first half of 2024 is 8,585 aircraft. So again, Boeing with 5,000, I think 400, and then Airbus with 8,000, almost 600. And you can see the order book, even for things like helicopters, is actually pretty big. So these basically, in my mind, the next two obvious questions are: okay, people obviously want a lot of airplanes. Why are we not ramping up production? Why is Boeing only delivering one airplane a day instead of one airplane every hour? What's keeping us from that? And then the other question that I think it's kind of like obvious is, okay, someone's buying a ton of airplanes. Where are all these airplanes going, right? When you to fly airplanes, first of all, you need people who want to fly. You also need airports, right? So I think airports have capacity, so you might want to look into, okay, where are most new airports being built today? And I think this is basically it all comes down to, like, where is the population growing right now? Let's look it up right now, but I have a feeling that most new airports are not being built in the US. It's actually probably somewhere in China and somewhere in India, somewhere in the Middle East. So new airports being built. Again, very, very naive Google search. I'm just jumping to it for the first time. 10 of the world's biggest airport mega projects under construction. So let's take a look at that. We have India, we have Poland, we have Thailand, we have Singapore, Philippines. There's actually one in the US here. This is actually great in LA. I didn't know that. New York, JFK expansion, an expansion. Vietnam, UK, Dubai. Right. So like I was saying, a lot of Asia, a lot of outside of North America. Whereas in the past, I would think most of commercial aviation would have happened in the US, and actually that might still be true, but I think that's changing, and that's probably what explains the backlog. So where do most flights should we just ask ChatGPT, where are most new airports being built? And it feels a little slow today. It's gonna search the web. New airports, Dubai, okay, yes. Middle East, Asia, yes. Where do most commercial aviation flights take place today? Maybe a better way of asking that is, what is the most popular commercial aviation route? What is the most commercial? Give me the top 10. And of course, this is ChatGPT, so I'm not saying this is like the absolute truth, but I think directionally this will be correct. Yeah, North America leads the pack, so this is probably still the case. Europe, Asia Pacific, yes. Okay, well, ChatGPT thinks the busiest commercial aviation route is from Jeju to Seoul. I actually don't know where Jeju is, so my ignorance is showing. South Korea. So within South Korea, apparently the busiest, Tokyo, Haneda, so in Japan, Vietnam, Japan, China. So you can see here basically that, again, it's Asia where it's happening. And that's where all the new airports are being built. And I suspect that's largely what's driving the order backlog for, for these aircraft. The other interesting question, to keep in mind is obviously aircrafts are in service for a long time. I've actually flown aircraft that are older than me, so we can ask what is the average lifespan of a Boeing 737, and it's gonna say 20 to 25 years, right? I suspect a lot of these older aircraft are actually flying on those developing nation routes. Anyway, so I thought that was interesting. One question that's always been on my mind is like, why are we not ramping up production? I've never heard a good answer for this. It seems to be like just technically very hard, and not a lot of economic incentives on doing so. Basically, I think the belief is that if they were to burn through the order book, there's not necessarily more orders coming through. Again, these things go out in the field, live for 20, 25 years. And demand doesn't grow unless there's huge population growth with GDP growth, GDP per capita growth, so more people can afford to fly and so on. So I thought that was interesting. And then the other thing I just before we actually get to reading this very interesting article, and I know I keep putting it off, but I thought it was interesting. Like I mentioned, there's only Boeing and Airbus, but there's also the Russians. Russia has two Russian commercial aviation manufacturers. There's two companies, I can never remember the names, that kind of like built commercial aviation. Of course, they also built military aircraft, but I think Yakolev is one of them. But my point here is that even though Russia, apparently has the capability of building flying vehicles, you don't see them outside of Russia. So it's never gone beyond its national market the way Airbus and Boeing have been able to. And now China has COMAC. COMAC is basically, the COMAC C919. It's I think it's a twin. They call it a long fuselage. No, what do you call it? A narrow body. So this is basically narrow bodies. I think are responsible for most flights. But basically, this is COMAC is China's equivalent of Boeing, and you can see here that they're just ramping up. So the COMAC 7919 here, which is gonna be like the workhorse. First flight was 7 years ago. There's only 7 in service, but I'm pretty sure last time I checked this Wikipedia article, this number was much lower. There's been 13 built, so they're currently ramping up, and so China's coming. But again, at this point, you don't see this outside of China, and actually throughout history, a lot of countries tried to build their own aircraft, and that's why Embraer in Brazil, it's such an interesting story because first of all, they're still around. They have some presence outside of Brazil, and so I think it's interesting to kind of wonder what did they do different, right? Because for example, Argentina also had a commercial aviation program. Let's see if we can find it. This was a while ago. Okay, this is in Spanish, but let's see. So, yeah, so it looks like they're not like they were developing their own aircraft, these funky looking things, but they stopped. Uh, Looks like they assemble airframes that are derivatives of other things. Um, I think Korea also had a commercial aviation program. Korea makes their own commercial aviation airframes. Korea Aerospace projects. They definitely have the satellites still going on. Fixed wing aircraft. Development, military, supersonic, again, military stuff, not actually commercial aviation, not like the narrow bodies. I wish, and maybe for next time I'll do more my own research and find out. There's actually, if anyone listens to Outlaws, it's this podcast from Bloomberg, and there's actually, Bloomberg has written a bunch of these on how Embraer, how they survived. This is actually pretty good. But apparently what it came down to was that, this was an age where a lot of countries wanted to build their own aircraft because everyone understood that, flight was really important, and it was kind of like national pride. Let's build our own. Except building an aircraft, the entire airframe, every component is really hard, and companies like Boeing, they don't actually build the entire aircraft. They build the airframe and then they integrate components. So Boeing will build the airframe, the fuselage, the wings, but then the jet, the turbines will come from Pratt and Whitney or GE, General, and so on. And so that was the key. That was what Embraer did. That's what Brazil was willing to do. That's what this founder guy, who I believe went to MIT actually. Okay, well, maybe I got that wrong from the Outlaws podcast. But from my understanding, that part of the reason why Embraer was successful was because they were very open-minded on using other people's components instead of trying to build everything on their own, which is what led to the failure on Korea's side and Argentina and probably other nations. Actually, that would be one cool thing to see if China's Comac is using their own engines or using different engines. In October. Okay, so it looks they're using CFM Leap 1C, but they're trying to move away from that. So what is this? It's a bypass engine from GE. Manufacturer CFM. Okay. It's the same engine using the 737 MAX. Interesting. Okay, so I'm not familiar with this company, but obviously this sounds like it's not. It's an American company, right? So again, this is like China saying we're gonna build our own airframe or our own commercial commercial aviation program, and we're willing to use other people's components because we understand that makes things way easier. That de-risks the program, way cheaper to actually get something in the air. Anyways, I think that was my rant. Yeah, one last point I'll make, which I thought was interesting, was that if you've ever read any of Elon Musk's books, there's this thing he calls the Idiot Index. And what the Idiot Index is basically, it's basically the mass of an object divided by the cost of basically producing that object, right? So, if it takes a lot of money to make, a tube of aluminum or something like that, that has a high Idiot Index, and that's what you should basically focus your efforts on cost reduction, and that's where your engineers' time should be spent. And so I thought it was interesting to compare. You can kind of like calculate the the idiot index of an aircraft at an assembly level, like the entire aircraft, and compare with that of like a Falcon 9 or a Falcon Heavy from SpaceX, to kind of like get a sense of which one is more optimized, which one's more cost effective. And I tried to do this on, oh, let me see, I tweeted about it a while ago. Let's see. Anyways, my point was like, it was obviously aircraft are something that have been optimized for a long time, and it was actually kind of like surprising to see that SpaceX rockets actually have a similar index value. I can't find it. Let me see. Okay. You can see that I've been tweeting about like, oh, why is Boeing's production rate so low for a while? Like, it's honestly something that puzzles me. Yeah. What do you think is more cost effective on a dollar per kilogram basis? A Boeing 737 with hundreds of them built per year and manufacturing lines and supply chains perfected over 2 decades, or a Falcon 9 with a new design and only handfuls made per year? Right. So, I guess my argument was that, Elon is known for really pushing their engineers to like optimize systems and reduce every cost, right? So even though these rockets are newer and less optimized, just they had less time to optimize it. I had the sense that they probably have a better index than Boeing, because kind of like feels like Boeing has not really innovated in a while. But that's just the numbers are hard to find. That was just like a gut feeling. Anyways, let's get to these. I don't think I have anything else to say here. Yeah. All right. So a cycle of mystery. By the way, I'm just gonna read it out loud. I don't know if that's weird. Let's see how that goes. A cycle of misery, the business of building commercial aircraft. So there are no historic precedents or current parallels for the magnitude of financial exposure risk by an American airframe company. And that was George Ball, the managing director at Lehman Brothers in 1982. Lehman Brothers, of course, is no more. And just for context, let's look at what Boeing was doing in 1982. So in 1982, Boeing was developing the 757, again a narrow body aircraft, which is it's not produced anymore, but I'm sure that was expensive. So the quote is probably related to that. You can't win, you can't break even, and you can't quit. Jen Pearson, former CEO of Airbus. Not super optimistic. Boeing is once again in the news following an incident of Alaska Airlines Flight 1282, where an emergency door plug fell off mid-flight due to missing or improperly installed bolts. The aircraft, a 737 MAX 9, is from the same 737 MAX family that suffered 2 fatal crashes in late 2018 and 2019, which we were talking about earlier. Predictably, the incident triggered a new round of discussion about the decline of Boeing as an aircraft manufacturer. Nearly every source points to the same instigating event, the 1997 merger with McDonnell Douglas, which changed Boeing from an engineering-driven company focused on building the best airplanes possible to one which focused overwhelmingly on financials and stock price. Let's look at the stock price since the merger. 1997. So even if you help from the merger, it's like 3x return. It's not amazing, but not bad. And you can pretty much see what happened with these incidents just by looking at this stock chart. Almost looks like a middle finger here. As far as I can tell, this characterization is accurate, And yet, it misses a big part of the picture, the brutal structure of the commercial aircraft industry that drives companies like Boeing to create things like the 737 MAX and update to a 50-year-old airplane instead of creating a new model from scratch. By unpacking how the commercial aircraft industry works, we can better understand Boeing's behavior. And this is referencing the fact that the 737 MAX 8, MAX 9, basically instead of having to rebuild the entire, design a new airframe from scratch, they're just taking an existing one and retrofitting new components, new engines to get it more efficient. There's like very basic constraints when you do something like that. Sometimes you want to put a new engine, but the engine is too big to fit under the wing of the old airframe. So now suddenly you're, making all these funky things to adjust the center of gravity to make it actually fit. That can lead to trade-offs that can be dangerous. That I think that's basically what the 737 MAX story developed into. I think this is gonna get to it, so I won't comment more. But okay, let's keep going. The risks of developing a new aircraft, making commercial aircraft, large jetliners purchased by commercial airplanes, in some ways like any other manufacturing industry. A company develops a product and tries to sell it for enough to cover the cost of developing and producing it. Makes sense? If it's successful and turns a profit, it goes on to develop a new product. If it's not, it goes out of business. What sets the aircraft industry apart is that the scale at which these things take place. Developing a commercial jetliner is incredibly expensive. The budget for new aircraft development programs are in the billions of dollars, and the inevitable cost overruns can drive development costs to 20 to 30 billion dollars or more. And there's a chart here showing the aircraft. The 777 budget costs 7 billion, actually costs 12 to 14 billion. And it's the same trend for the 787, the A380, the A350, Airbus, Boeing. Bombardier is here, the C series. That was sad. Mitsubishi is here, the Space Jet, which was actually never completed. Apparently, almost $10 billion into it. But yeah, that's so pretty expensive. This is not simply a case of modern bloated companies that have forgotten how to do things efficiently, though there is some of that. Developing a jet airline has always been expensive. Boeing spent anywhere from 1.2 to 2 billion to develop the 747 in the late 1960s. This is 10 to 20 billion in 2023 dollars. And other manufacturers at the time, like Lockheed and McDonnell Douglas, noted that their own new aircraft development costs were similar. Of course, the 747, if you're not super familiar with airplanes, the 747 is the super cool two-decker airplane from Boeing, which unfortunately they do not produce anymore, and there might or might not be a couple left in service. But I got to fly in one once, super cool. The cost of developing a new commercial aircraft can be a significant fraction of, if not greater than, the entire value of the company, which is insane. The $886 million Boeing spent developing its first jet airliner in 1952, the 707, was $36 million more than the company was worth. When Boeing began development of the 747 in 1965, the company was valued at $375 million, less than a third of what it spent on the 747's development. Most other programs aren't quite so loop-sided, but still represent enormous risks. The Boeing 777 cost an estimated 12 to 14 billion to develop at a time when Boeing was worth in the neighborhood of $30 billion. And when Airbus launched the A380 program, it budgeted 10.7 billion, half the value of the company, and much less than was ultimately spent. Aircraft manufacturers are frequently betting the company when they decide to develop a new jet model. So that's crazy. Spending billions of dollars on new product development isn't unique to the aircraft industry. A new car model will cost billions of dollars to develop, as will a new drug. But both cars and drugs can spread their development costs over millions of products sales. The market for commercial aircraft, on the other hand, is much smaller. Only around 1,000 jets are sold every year. The aircraft manufacturers need to be able to make back the billions spent on product development, factories, and tooling on just a few hundred sales. This creates. Oh, by the way, and this this begs the question: what's the margin on a commercial aviation aircraft? When you go and buy a 737, if you're paying 100 million, how much of that is profit? And I think it's probably much lower than we would imagine. Because the other thing is like who's buying them, right? Who's buying this aircraft? Who's operating the aircraft? And obviously, airline companies like American Airlines and Delta, they don't have huge profits. That business is also like very penny pinching. So, Boeing is trying to make money to build these airplanes. Their customers don't have that. They are not making that much money. There's probably a lot of financing involved here. Overall, it's not great. This creates a few difficulties for aircraft manufacturers. For one, it makes learning curves very important. As discussed previously, learning curves are the phenomenon that production costs or some related measures such as labor hours tend to fall by a constant percentage for every cumulative doubling of production volume. Going from 10 to 20 units produced yields the same percentage cost decrease as going from 10,000 to 20,000. That's really interesting. So basically, as you produce more units, you get the know-how to reduce cost, which makes sense. Reduce costs make things more efficient, which of course makes sense. What's interesting here is kind of like the linear nature that it's proposing here, which that's very interesting. High volume products spend most of their time on a relatively flat portion of the learning curve. We're doubling because they already, such high volume takes a lot of units to double, right? So you basically plateau on the learnings. High volume products spend most of their time on a relatively flat portion of the learning curve, where doublings are farther and further apart. If you've produced 1 million of something, whether you make another 500 or 5,000 will make almost no difference in learning curve terms. But if you've only made 50 of something, making another 500 makes a huge difference in the level of cost reduction that can be achieved. Makes sense. Thus, if you only plan to sell a few hundred of something, a relatively small number of sales will have a large impact on how efficiently you are producing and how profitable you are. And I suspect this is true for a number of reasons, from economies of scale to just being able to hire more people to streamline your operations and spending on tooling and things like that. So far, a really interesting article. Commercial aircraft manufacturers rely on getting enough orders to push them far enough down the learning curve where they're making enough money per plane to earn back the cost of developing it. Early planes, let's repeat that. I think that's important. Commercial aircraft manufacturers rely on getting enough orders to push them far enough the learning curve where they're making enough money per plane to earn back the cost of developing it, right? So obviously you spend a ton of money building this airplane, and now you need to make sure you can sell a lot of them, because the more you sell, the more you make, and the more you make, the more efficient you are at making them. And the more efficient you are at making them, the more profitable you're going to be per airplane. And more profits means you'll get a payback, a return on your original investment faster, or at all. You might not even get a return on investment if you don't actually hit a certain production volume. Early planes might be produced so inefficiently that they're sold for less than it costs to make them. Which is obviously it's not a good place to be as a business of anything. This is typically in the neighborhood of 500 aircraft and might be much more if a program goes way over budget. Sell fewer and the program will lose money. So same principle. The relatively small number of aircraft sales also creates intense pressure to accurately predict trends in air travel. Manufacturers need to skate where the puck will be, to develop a new kind of aircraft that airlines would want for many years in the future. And actually, very interesting enough, this ties to what we were talking about earlier, which is like, where the new aircraft, where new airports being built, where people flying more these days. These will shape the kind of aircraft that airlines need, depending on like how many people they need to fly per route, how long these routes are, and so on. Because again, just a technicality, but because the airplane that you need to, if you're crossing the ocean, the Pacific Ocean, and traveling a long distance, it's different from the airplane you would use just to fly national flights within the US, with less passengers and less mileage, and so on, and different pressure cycles, because you're going to be landing more often and so on. So all of these things really matter in terms of what aircraft you build. And they haven't said it here, but I don't think you can build one aircraft that rules it all, like can do everything that would operate efficiently. And maybe they'll get to it, but the reason why the aircrafts are optimized for a route is because you do need to be able to operate it very efficiently. Guessing wrong can be disastrous. Airbus lost enormous amounts of money when it misjudged the market for its enormous A380. So the A380 is basically, it's Airbus response to the Boeing 747. So Airbus A380. I actually never been on one of these, and I think the Emirates has them in service. Double decker, but as where the 747 only has double decker on the front, this has double decker all the way. So super cool airplane. Would love to fly in one of these one day. That actually looks insanely huge. Okay, so apparently Airbus only sold 251 airplanes, far short of what it needed to break even, and the last A380 rolled off the line in 2021. So sadly, they don't make A380s anymore. Airbus projected that the continued growth in air travel would create demand for an even larger aircraft that could move passengers cheaply between large hub airports. That actually makes sense. But in fact, international travel fragmented, and the airlines increasingly fly direct flights between destinations using smaller, easier to fill aircraft like the Boeing 787. So these narrow bodies, the 787, the Comac 919, C919. So narrow bodies is where the industry went, and it seems like that's where things are still headed. In the late 1960s, Lockheed and McDonnell Douglas drove each other to ruin by each developing a new aircraft, the L1011 and the DC-10. The DC-10, which is famous. For what turned out to be a very small market, less than 700 aircraft were sold between them. Lockheed ended up abandoning the commercial aircraft market after losing $2.5 billion on the program, $9 billion in 2023 dollars. And McDonnell Douglas never recovered, ultimately selling itself to Boeing in 1997, the merger that we were talking about earlier. As its market share declined and it was unable to fund the development of new aircraft. Just a note on that, if your guys are ever in the Bay Area, or if you're from the Bay Area, there's actually an aviation museum, the Hiller Aviation Museum. And it actually talks a lot about this period in aviation where a lot of quote-unquote startups were coming up, and basically these were companies that would build some sort of aircraft, some fixed-wing aircraft, some sort of helicopter, and there were hundreds of them, similar to when the automotive was first being developed in Detroit, and very similar to kind of like AI startups in San Francisco today. Anyways, I thought it was very interesting. I would highly recommend going to the Hiller Aviation Museum if you're ever in the San Francisco Bay Area. Alright, back to the article. But guessing right comes with its own problems. If a program gets delayed, that can cause lost orders, lack of confidence from airlines, and ultimately drive customers into the arms of a competitor. Boeing originally planned to introduce its 787 in 2008, but it was delayed until 2011, driving customers to purchase the competing Airbus A330. Airbus bragged that it sold more A330s after Boeing launched the 787 than before, which is actually really interesting. Had Boeing delivered on time, its advantage over Airbus would have been enormous. So obviously there's a lot of pressure to get to market faster, and so incentives to uh, maybe cut corners. Not saying they cut corners, but of course there's a lot of pressure to just deliver. And too many orders for a new plane can be almost as bad as too few. In the late 1960s, Douglas choked on unexpectedly high demand for its DC-9. It couldn't meet its delivery schedules, was forced to pay compensation to the airlines affected, and was almost forced into bankruptcy due to cash flow problems, resulting in a merger with McDonnell Aircraft. Boeing had a similar struggle when trying to rapidly ramp up production of its revised 737, called the 737 Next Generation, or NG. This airplane is already in service in the mid-1990s, apparently for a long time. It was ultimately forced to temporarily stop production due to the chaos, resulting in late deliveries and associated penalties and a net loss for the year 1997. The company's first net loss since 1959. Boeing is estimated to have lost $1 billion on the first 400 737 NGs, despite them being a derivative of an aircraft Boeing had been building since the 1960s. Which it's very interesting. You would think that it's a similar aircraft. Your production lines are already laid out. It wouldn't be that hard to start production and do so very efficiently, but apparently it's still very hard. So aircraft are hard and complex, which is interesting. I think it's easy to say like, oh, we've been building aircraft for so long and we kind of like understand how they work, but it's still a very complex thing. Even cars are very complex, and I'm pretty sure aircraft have at least an order of magnitude more parts than a car, which adds complexity. Aircraft parts, car engineering. I have a chart in mind that plots number of parts on a vehicle, which we used to use at Tesla, would just kind of like show the complexity. Anyways, I can't find it, but basically number of parts in a Boeing 737. Let's see. So Google says there's 600,000 parts in a Boeing 737, and number of parts in a I don't know what car comes to mind. Any car, Ford Fiesta. Okay, that wasn't a good example. On a Ford Mustang. Okay, that's okay. I don't know if that's true. It's saying 150. That sounds wrong. On a Toyota Camry, something. Okay, so 12,000 parts on a Camry, 600,000 parts on a 737, right? So you can imagine, in general, Toyotas have 3,000 parts. So a car has around 3,000 parts, and an aircraft has around 600,000 parts, right? So at least an order of magnitude more parts, basically 20x more parts. Every part, you need to get it right. Every single part, every part has supply chain, every part has risk, every part has to go through homologation. Someone has to design every part. You need to put every part in the right place. You need to service every part. So of course this comes with huge complexity. Global events can quickly shift trends in air travel, completely changing the types of aircraft airlines wants to buy. Airbus, for instance, had little initial success selling its first model, the A300. By 1978, 4 years after its introduction, it had sold only 38 of them. But increased fuel prices from the second oil crisis, along with increasing competition from airlines, created a demand for a fuel-efficient twin-engine wide-body airliner, and only the A300 fit the bill. So basically, suddenly, fuel got so expensive that these super efficient aircraft that no one wanted before, suddenly everyone wanted. By 1979, sales had climbed to over 300. Similarly, the regulation of the American airline industry forced airlines to be much more competitive on price and focused on things like fuel efficiency and operating cost. This changed the calculus for the type of aircraft that they were interested in buying and boosted demand for airplanes like Boeing 737. So that's interesting. I'm actually not sure which regulations they're referring to, but that could be another video. Often, success comes down to luck as much as anything else. Airbus got lucky when spiking oil prices meant its A300 was suddenly in high demand and had no competition. Boeing got lucky with its 737 in the 1960s, which went into service more than 2 years after the similar DC-9, only succeeding in part because of Douglas production delays. And Boeing got lucky again with the 747, which, not unlike the A380, was an enormous aircraft that few airlines really needed. It only succeeded because Juan Trippe, the founder of Pan Am, bought them on something of a whim. Trippe, liked to have the latest airplanes, and so no need for market analysis. So, really interesting executive there. Other airlines didn't follow suit, not wanting to grant Pan Am the marketing benefit of having the largest airliners, though the 747 became more and more useful as international travel increased. So that's interesting, right? So this guy was basically just giving the best airplane, and then their competitors were like, "Oh, we can't let him have the biggest airplane. We need it too, right? Because it's a marketing advantage." I don't know if the numbers would back that up, but I think human nature does work that way. Aircraft manufacturers are faced with the inevitable task of trying to navigate this landscape while putting down billions of dollars at risk. But of course, developing new products isn't an option. Like any other industry, competitors are trying to secure their own advantage by pitching their products to a limited number of customers. Aircraft technology is constantly changing, and airlines, in a brutal competition of their own, all want the latest technologies. Like I said, airlines, so American Airlines, Delta, so on. It's a very competitive space as well, right? So, better aerodynamics, lighter materials, larger and more efficient airplanes, engines, and so on. That will reduce their operating costs and improve their passengers' experience. Losing even one order can be an enormous setback for an aircraft manufacturer, both because of the small number of customers overall, there's not that many airlines, and because sales tend to have momentum. A sale to one airline probably means more future sales to that airline, since there will be efficiencies from fleet commonality and things like shared maintenance and training, right? So I don't know if this is common knowledge, but the cockpit from a Boeing to an Airbus is actually very different in how you fly it, where the instruments are, how the aircraft handles, right? So you would train a pilot for a specific aircraft, and it's not like a pilot who just can fly any airplane. There's some training involved. So, if all your airplanes are the same, that actually does have some operational efficiencies. Airlines are all too aware of the fact that too few sales can put an aircraft manufacturer on dangerous ground, making it risky for an airline to hitch itself to a loser. Right, so airlines don't want to buy the airplane that no one else is buying, because what if they go out of business, and you're gonna have an airplane that no one can service, and so on. So that is also a risk. Although I think that's less relevant now that there's only two major players. If an aircraft manufacturer is able to successfully navigate this landscape, the reward is paltry profit. Between 1970 and 2010, Boeing, the most successful commercial aircraft builder, averaged just over 5% annual profit. So that's very low. Unsurprisingly, fierce and costly competition and miserly profits have gradually driven competitors from the space, leaving just Boeing and Airbus. And if you're feeling charitable, Bombardier and Embraer, which we mentioned earlier. Bombardier is actually not a player anymore in the space. It sold its last commercial aviation program to Airbus, but Bombardier sells to Airbus. It didn't sell it, it's more like it gave it away. Bombardier sold what it's now known as the Airbus A220. It was actually the Bombardier CS100, which is a very small, jet. That's from what I recall. I think they paid Airbus to take it. It was that bad, and they built 342 so far. So, not a smashing success, but it's not bad. If an aircraft manufacturer is able to successfully navigate this landscape, The reward is a paltry. Oh, we already read this. Mm. Companies like the Havilland, Dassault, Lockheed, Douglas, Convair, Glenn Martin have all been driven out or forced to merge. Looking at the history of jet aircraft manufacturing in 1982, John Newhouse estimates that of the 22 commercial jet airliners that had been developed, only two, the Boeing 707 and the Boeing 727, were believed to have made any money. Though he notes that the 747 might eventually make that list as well. Well, with the hindsight of, with the advantage of hindsight, let's see if we can tell. I mean, they did build a bunch of them, so. Okay, ChatGPT question. Was the 777 profitable for Boeing? Of course, they don't produce it anymore, but you might eventually turn profit just from the service contracts, like which make for 10% of Boeing's revenue. It's highly profitable. Well, okay, ChatGPT says it's highly profitable, but I'm not super sure. This article makes it sound like maybe not. And there's a source here, citation. Who's Newhouse? Newhouse, that's it. Okay. The result of these difficulties is that aircraft manufacturers think very carefully about developing a new aircraft. The risks are large, the reward small and uncertain. It's often a much safer bet to simply develop a modification of an existing model, keeping the same basic airframe and adding more efficient engines or a tweaked wing shape, or stretching it to add more passenger capacity. Revising its existing model can cost just 10 to 20% of designing a new plane from scratch, and can provide nearly as many benefits. The typical new aircraft might be 20-30% more fuel efficient than existing designs, but Boeing was able to squeeze a 15 to 16% improvement with the revised 737 MAX. So that's really good. And updating existing models is also cheaper for airlines, which don't have to retrain their pilots to fly the aircraft. Again, every aircraft requires some training for a pilot to learn how to fly it. To see what this sort of calculus looks like in practice, let's look at the history of the Boeing 737, which has been revised and updated repeatedly since it first flew in 1967. I'm actually running out of time. Okay. The evolution of the Boeing 737. Actually, let me just check. Okay. The evolution of the Boeing 737. Boeing first developed the 737 in the mid-1960s as a short-range, small-capacity aircraft to flesh out its product line and prevent Douglas from having the entire low end of the market with itself with the DC-9. Initially, it was not particularly successful, nor was it expected to be. Douglas had a 2-year head start with the DC-9, and Boeing's earlier 727 was already serving much of that market, albeit with 3 engines instead of more efficient 2 engines of the 737, all else being equal. The fewer engines an aircraft has, the less expensive it will be to operate. So basically, Boeing built a competing aircraft, but it was just more fuel efficient than Douglas aircraft. In fact, the program was very nearly canceled shortly after it was launched due to poor early sales. To minimize development costs and time, the 737 was designed to share as many parts as possible with the earlier 707 and 727, which is really funny when you think that 737 is still in operation today. It's everywhere, and it has parts from a 707, which I think it was one of Boeing's first aircraft, if not the first. Early 737 performance was lower than expected, so Boeing developed an advanced version with improved aerodynamics in 1970. But even with these improvements, Douglas struggles building the DC-9, and an order for a military version of the 737, the T-43A trainer, sales were still sluggish. The aircraft was being built at just a rate of 2 per month. So 2 per month. I think earlier we said that Boeing was delivering aircraft now at, did we say 1 per week? No, 1 per day, 1 a day. So 2 per month. 2 per month is super low, right? So Boeing, even now, after all the struggles they've had over the last 4 years, they still deliver, I think, 1 per day. And back then they were just, building 2 per month. So that's really slow. so one every 2 weeks. And until 1973, the program was on the verge of being cancelled. During this period, Boeing nearly went bankrupt due to the cost overrun of the 747 program and had to lay off 75% of its workforce. The 737 was only safe because it was finally being sold for less than its production cost, but it was not expected to pay back its development costs. So that's interesting. So the 737 was being sold for less than its production cost, right? So it was not expected to pay back its development costs. So if you sell it for less than it costs you to make, I guess, first of all, maybe they had no other option. Second of all, there's still these service contracts to try to turn some profit. But sales began to pick up in 1973, and production had reached 5 aircraft per month, so a little better, 1.2 a week, in 1974, so just a year after. By 1978, it had, against all odds, become the best-selling jetliner in the world, a title which is still retained from 1980 to 1985. Airline deregulation in the US had caused a shift in airline strategy. Instead of directly connecting two cities with low-volume flights, they began to connect through hub airports using smaller, cheaper to operate aircraft, which the 737 fits the bill perfectly. But Boeing's competitors weren't standing still. Douglas launched an updated version of the DC-9, its Super 80, with an improved version of the Pratt & Whitney engine that made it quieter and more fuel efficient than the 737. To counter a threat and to deal with even more stringent noise regulations, Boeing responded with the new generation of the Boeing 737-300, which began development in 1981, which added passenger capacity, improved aerodynamics, and had a new and more efficient high bypass turbofan from CFMI, a joint venture between GE and a French company, Snecma. Fitting such a large engine under the 737 wing was a challenge. Let's look at the 737 wing. Just so you understand, this is literally just physics in terms of how can you fit something in the. So this is a I don't want to. 737-300. So this is the 737-300, and and this is obviously the engine, and this engine looks a little more modern. Older engines were rounded. More modern engines are kind of shaped like this. The engine actually produces some lift. You can picture that this area almost acts as a wing, produces some amount of lift. But anyways, you can imagine that if this was bigger, if you can imagine a bigger circle here, the ground clearance, it's already low, would be even lower. And of course, it looks like there's space here, but you need to account for things like, what if you land and there's snow, and also debris, right? So the closer you have a giant fan to the ground, it's gonna stack up on rocks and anything that's on the ground, and you obviously do not want that. So there's limits for that. There's also like, if one of your tires is flat, you obviously don't want your engine to, touch the ground. So even though there looks like there's some space here, this is actually probably like super low. So fitting such a large engine under the 737 wing was a challenge. The 737 had been originally designed with low ground clearance to accommodate second-tier airports. So I think we see these less, but before, like, especially before, like, we would literally drive a truck with stairs onto the airplane so passengers can load up, right? So the further away you are from the ground, the harder it is to load up passengers, and something as simple as that can drive the design decisions of a 737. Extending a landing gear to raise the airplane would have required shifting the location of the wheel wells, which would have changed the structure of the plane enough to essentially make it a new aircraft, right? So basically, how do you get an aircraft further up from the ground? You can make the landing gear longer, right? But now that it's longer, when it stalls away, how airplanes take off and then the landing gear kind of like folds into the airplane. But now that it's longer, it cannot fall in the same direction. You need to move it around. And now you're modifying the entire structure, and now it's basically a new aircraft. You need to recertify it. Instead, the engine was squeezed into the space available, giving it a telltale ellipsoid shape. So that ellipsoid shape is what we were talking about earlier, which is not a perfect circle, but it's actually these like an ellipsis. Kind of like not like these, but like more like these. The high bypass engine, sorry for the train. The high bypass engine gave the 737-300 an 18% improvement in fuel efficiency versus older generation aircraft at an 11% improvement over McDonnell Douglas Super 80, while still keeping it as similar as possible to the previous 737. So way more efficient and still close enough to the previous aircraft that you don't need to recertify the entire airframe, and you can probably carry over some of those manufacturing efficiencies. But as the 737-300 took shape, a new challenger was emerging. So super competitive field here. Following the success of its A300, Airbus began the development of the smaller A320, a direct competitor to the 737 in 1984. The A320 incorporated many advanced technologies such as fly-by-wire. So fly-by-wire just means that basically when the pilot kind of like moves the steering, instead of being a hydraulic system or a mechanical wire system, it's literally just sending electrical signals to an actuator on the wing to move the flaps and things like that. Yeah, which by the way, it's very exciting because we're starting to see fly-by-wire or drive-by-wire systems in cars now. The Cybertruck has a steer-by-wire system, which is crazy. So yeah, new technologies such as fly-by-wire, replacing heavy mechanical or hydraulic linkages between the aircraft controls and the plane's control surfaces with lighter electronic ones. That's actually just what I was saying. So instead of having a hydraulic system, you can just have literally a wire sending electric signals to an actuator in the wing. Much easier packaging, much less weight in terms of hydraulic fluid. Hydraulic fluid is also dangerous in an aircraft. It can be flammable, and there's all these advantages. By 1987, the A320 had already racked up 400 orders, including a large order from Northwest Airlines, a longtime Boeing customer. So it was clear that it was a fierce competitor to the 737-300. Some argue that Boeing could have and should have killed the A320 immediately by announcing a new clean sheet aircraft. At the time, Boeing was working on a 737 size aircraft called a 7J7. I don't think that ever made it to market, which used an advanced unducted fan (UDF) aircraft engine from GE. Theoretically, the 7J7 would have been 60% more fuel efficient than existing airlines, along with incorporating technologies like fly-by-wire. But the UDF engine had unresolved technical issues like high noise generation, and Boeing was concerned with how long it would take to get the 7J7 to market. Instead, Boeing developed another stretched-out version of its 737, the 737-400, canceled the 7J7 project, and began to develop an aircraft to fill the gap between its 767 and the 747, which was the 777. Just out of curiosity, let's look what this unducted fan looks like from General Electric. You can on a jet air, yeah. So it almost looks like a propeller. It's interesting. Looks like it's coming back. GE resurrects the Propan aircraft engine. So it looks like the idea is coming back. It just wasn't the right time back then. But as the A320 continued to encroach on the market and more long-time Boeing customers deflected, such as United in 1992, it was clear that a replacement for the 737 was required. Many once again favor the development of a clean sheet aircraft, which Airbus believes would have been catastrophic for the A320, but Boeing was gun-shy about new aircraft after the 777. Though the program was on time and delivered an exceptional aircraft, costs spiraled out of control, up to $14 billion by some estimates, $28 billion in 2023 dollars, against projected budget of $5 billion. So this was for the Boeing 777, so very expensive program. So after a very expensive program, Boeing wasn't excited about jumping to another clean sheet aircraft. Instead, Boeing launched a next generation, the NG 737, another update to the 737 airframe. The 737 NG feature, among other things, a new wing design, a more efficient engine, which reduces fuel costs by 9% and maintenance costs by 15%, and added winglets for improved aerodynamics. So winglets are those features at the end of the wing, at the tips of the wings that usually will shape up. And they basically help with vortex generation on the wingtip. Basically, when you have a wing, you have a low pressure area and a high pressure area, and high pressure underneath the wing, low pressure on top of the wing. But on the wingtip, where these two different pressure areas mix, they usually generate a vortex, kind of like a tornado, basically, which is basically pulls back the airplane, so it generates drag, and you want to limit that. So winglets help basically manage that those pressures, that energy. Let's see what we have here. Where are we? The 737 NG also reduced part count by 33% compared to previous versions, while still retaining enough commonality to require minimal pilot training and staying within the FAA's derivative rules. First delivered in December 1997, the 737 NG became immensely popular with the 737-800 version selling more than 5,000 aircraft over the next 20 years. So very, very successful program. Though, as we've noted, ramping up production came with immense difficulties. However, this wasn't enough to bury the A320, which also continued to sell well. So if you have both aircraft selling well, this must have been a big moment for just the aviation industry in general, if that there's that many orders. Some Airbus people believe that a clean sheet aircraft would have been catastrophic for the A320 in the late 90s. Now, I do want to point out a couple of things here. You might have seen some trends now. Basically, every new iteration features similar improvements. It's like quieter engines, more fuel efficient, more aerodynamic. Maybe more passengers. But that's basically all that happens, right? So it's like I put my aircraft, it's more efficient, and then the other guy puts an aircraft that's slightly more efficient, and that seems to be the way the industry has gone for a few decades. By the early 2000s, the 737 and the A320 had become the most important products in Boeing's and Airbus offerings, and combined made up 70% of the market for commercial airliners. Once again, Boeing began to consider a replacement for the 737 and initiated a project, Yellowstone, to explore clean sheet replacements for the 737 and other Boeing aircraft. But the findings weren't particularly heartening. Without a new advanced engine, which wouldn't be ready until 2013 or 2014, and again, a new engine is usually something that's outside of Boeing's control. It's something that General Electric or Pratt & Whitney or Rolls-Royce might develop, but it's not Boeing in-house. So they don't always get to set the timeline on that. Improvements in fuel efficiency would be at best 4%. So these are, at best 4%. These are probably improvements due to aerodynamics in the airframe. They could only find 4% without better engines. And the technologies it would incorporate from the under development 787, such as advanced composites, would be difficult to scale up to high volume production required for the 737 replacement. So it sounds like at the time the 787 was under development, so a new, more advanced aircraft, which used a lot of composites. So composites are materials like carbon fiber, which have the advantage of being super lightweight, having a high tensile strength to mass ratio. So they're very strong and very lightweight, but their manufacturing is a little more manual. Basically, you have to lay out these fibers. You have to wet them with epoxy, and you have to cure them at high temperatures and high pressures to generate good quality parts. And you need autoclaves and you need molds, and those things are not conducive to high volume production. Basically, it's very interesting because even SpaceX is now moving away from composites. The Falcon 9 had a lot of composites, but now the BFR, or whatever they're calling the big stainless steel rocket, it's actually made out of stainless steel, right? So there's not a lot of composites. even though there's kind of like a weight advantage, but it's not sufficient. Boeing had once again become gun shy about new aircraft due to its experience on the 787, which had gone massively over budget and behind schedule. The new financially focused Boeing had been reluctant enough to approve the development of the 787 and was even more reluctant now. So once again, like before when they had just finished the 777 and they didn't want to invest in a new 737. Once again, they had just started development of the 787 now, and they don't want to invest in a new 737. So kind of like history repeating itself here. By 2010, with new engines like the Pratt & Whitney GTF and the CFM LEAP on the horizon, so CFM LEAP is what the 737 MAX uses now, and the COMAX 7919 is using too. Boeing was leaning heavily towards a clean sheet 737 replacement. Boeing's hand ended up being forced by Airbus. In 2011, Airbus began work on a re-engined A320, so a 320 with new engines, with significantly improved performance, called the A320neo, which it probably sounds familiar for a lot of you that fly, and used it to partially lure away a major Boeing customer, American Airlines, which split a major order between Boeing and Airbus. Airbus believed that Boeing would feel forced to respond with its own re-engined rather than lose more customers, while it developed a clean sheet replacement. Customers, for their part, had lost confidence that Boeing could deliver a new aircraft on schedule after the 787 debacle, and preferred that Boeing launch a re-engine with a better shot of being on time. Right, so now they're getting pressure from customers telling them, just put a new engine on the 737, don't create a new one, it'll be way faster. And the A320neo is taking away their orders. So a lot of pressure to just put a new engine on the 737. A re-engine would have nearly all the benefits of a clean sheet aircraft, so 15 to 16% fuel savings versus 20% for a typical clean sheet. Cost perhaps 10 to 20% to develop, and avoid the cost of airlines having to retrain pilots, as well as things like having to figure out how to produce composite parts in high volume. So when you say it like that, it's basically all around sounds like, you shouldn't be developing a clean sheet 737 replacement. The rest, of course, is history. Instead of a new aircraft, Boeing developed yet another revision of the 737, the 737 MAX, fitting even larger engines on the aircraft while keeping it similar enough to fall under the FAA's derivative rules required, shifting them fitting even larger engines. Let me say that again. So fitting even these new larger engines on the aircraft while keeping it similar enough to fall under FAA's derivative rules, so they don't have to recertify the entire airframe, required shifting them very far forward and angling them slightly, so at an angle, which slightly changed the performance characteristics of the airplane. So you can imagine that if you have the wing, and usually you have the engine hanging on it, right? So if you see it from the side, it sounds like they had to move it forward, right, on the wing. And when you move something forward, it generates a momentum. It wants to tilt your wing sideways, and as you're flying, your whole center of mass has shifted. So now you need to accommodate for that. To keep its performance similar to previous 737s, you want to keep performance similar, so you don't have to retrain pilots. You can certify it as as the same aircraft. Boeing created software, what's called the MCAS, to try and emulate the behavior of earlier aircraft. The MCAS software and its interaction with various sensors ultimately caused 2 fatal crashes of 737 MAX flights, which you might have already, MCAS might sound familiar from the news, from that period. And now conclusion. So we're coming to an end here. I sometimes think about how the boundary of technological possibility is defined, not just by the mastery of the universe, but by the limits of the economy and the organizations that operate within it. If products are sufficiently complex and demand is for such small quantities that there is a limited business case for them, we won't get them, even if they're physically possible to build. Nuclear submarines seem close to this boundary. enormously complex weapons that only a tiny handful of organizations on the planet are capable of constructing. Jet airliners seem to be rapidly heading to this outer boundary, if they're not there already. Cost and level of technology required, along with tremendous risks of developing them and tiny number of cells on which cost can be recouped, have already whittled the number of providers down to essentially two, Boeing and Airbus, though perhaps China's COMAC might eventually add a third player. And there's no evidence that it's getting any easier. And that's the end of the article. So yeah, I think that was an interesting read. I certainly wasn't. I didn't know about all these 737 histories. I didn't know how expensive some of these aircrafts were to build. But it is very interesting, and I think the author makes a great point on the conclusion, right? So it's like we can build these great machines, but if we can't make an economic case for them, we'll never get them. But of course, we all agree that the world is a better place with us having airplanes, right? So it's, again, going back to what I used to say at the start of this video, it almost feels like magic. So this is great. So this is the end of the video. I didn't take any notes here, so I won't post anything, but actually I'll post a link to this article so you can go read it yourself. And before we wrap up, I just wanted to say thank you. So obviously this is my second video, and I think the first video actually went pretty well. So we're at 186 views right now, which is more than I imagined. Of course, it's not a MrBeast video, but I also understand that, you know, it was just me talking for half an hour to the camera. And more importantly, it seems like, you know, 5% of people actually sat there and watched the entire thing. On 100, yeah, it's almost 200 people. So that's like at least 10 of you actually watched the entire thing, which, you know, means a lot to me. And it really encouraged me to keep doing this. Now, I don't know how this video will turn out, just because we were basically reading instead of having a conversation and going down a rabbit hole. We'll probably go back to starting with a question and going down the rabbit hole on the next one. But yeah, I really appreciate that you're taking the time to watch these. You know, drop a like, subscribe, and, you know, maybe leave comments. I love, I got to talk to one of you guys on the comments on Reddit. That was super cool. You know, tell me I'm wrong or ask a question. The whole point of these is just to learn. I just, you know, want to learn new things, and hopefully that's why you're here too. So anyways, I'll see you in the next one.